America was the future. Modern, prosperous, seemingly democratic, in whose cause many eagerly enrolled. And for many Americans, Cuba became a place of retreat and refuge, a resort for the smart set and the socially prominent, attracting trendsetters and celebrities such as Gloria Vanderbilt, Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart, Irving Berlin, Will Rogers, and Errol Flynn. Cuba offered access to the exotic with minimum exposure to risk, a place where, as one writer put it approvingly, conscience takes a holiday. Havana, by the mid-1930s and 40s, was a city that had an estimated 20,000 prostitutes. The city, wrote Graham Greene, was, quote, an extraordinary city where every vice was permissible and every trade possible. Ernest Hemingway put it more bluntly. It had both fishing and fucking. Many Cubans welcomed the American presence as it promised the transformation of Cuban life from poverty to prosperity, from backwardness to modernity. To be sure, the price of success might well require Cubans to adapt to American values and tastes, but it was a price that some Cubans were willing to pay, particularly habaneros. Increasingly, Havana's inhabitants were living beyond their means, imagining themselves as de facto citizens of the wealthy and paternal colossus 90 miles away, even as they bridled at American swagger and presumption. By the mid-1950s, the sugar and tobacco economy began to sputter, prices began to plummet, the island's economy began to contract, opportunities to diminish. The cost of living began to soar, the cities flared into violence, Batista fled, Fidel came to power. Castro imagined a different future. His true calling, he felt, was to do everything in his power to escape the American orbit. He would end decades of humiliation by fulfilling Marti's dream of having Cuba play David to America's Goliath. Cuba, he declared, would break with the past and renounce the blandishments of the profligate American way of life. And I quote, "How could we import rice and buy Cadillacs? That is what we did before. Is that not madness? The act of a disoriented country. Why were we buying Cadillacs when what we needed were tractors? From now on, Cubans would have to tighten their belts, forgo the goods that they had for decades taken for granted." Castro sought to remake the Cuban personality, to construct what Che hailed as the new man, purged of egotism and selfishness, motivated more by moral incentives than material rewards, an ascetic revolutionary who would shun the gleaming goods on display in the seductive windows of El Encanto, one of Havana's most elegant department stores. 50 years before Castro's victory, expressing nationalism for many Cubans meant replacing Spanish customs with American ones. Now, with Castro at the helm, everything American was suspect. It was a political and cultural shock from which Cuba's middle class would never recover and which Washington's policymakers would never forgive. Most of them would prefer voluntary exile and prosperity in Miami to enforced privation and equality in Havana. The